Okay, so yesterday we made some copies, am I correct? And the last page you have is what, Nun Daled? Or Nun Hey? Maybe even Nun Vav?
Nun Hey.
Nun Hey is the last page. Okay. So let's just talk again a little bit about this Kal V'chomer that the Gemara presents in the name of Shimi, and two different approaches based on Tosfos as to how this Kal V'chomer works, the mechanism of the Kal V'chomer. One approach is that the Kal V'chomer is based on the fact that Ritzicha, meaning put the allegation incumbent upon Bezdin to put the murderer to death, is Docha Avod. It overrides Avod. And how much more so would it be Docha Shabbos? Because Avod is considered more Chomer than Shabbos. Now, if we take that approach, that the Kal V'chomer is based on the Chumrah, that special status of Ritzicha, that Ritzicha overrides Avoda, then we're stuck with a major problem, as Tosfos points out. And that is, Shev Altas. What do we mean? The Torah never says that to put a murderer to death, that's going to override Avoda. The Torah is just saying that as a result of the fact that we're going to take this man out to be executed, he's not going to be implementing the Avoda. That's called Shev Altas. And you want to derive the conclusion from that putting someone who's condemned to death, putting him to death on Shabbos would override the Shabbos. What kind of Havamim is that? I mean, Dayol Levamin Adin Lios Kenadu. You can't extend the Kal V'chomer beyond the Malamed. The Malamed in this case is Ritzicha, meaning put to death the Rotzeach. But that we're only doing by overriding the Avoda B'Shei B'Altas and telling him, sorry, buddy, this is not your day for the Mizbeach. We have other plans to do. But now you're going to derive from that Kal V'chomer that certainly Ritzicha, or in the case of Shreifas Bas Kohen, would override the Shabbos. Now you're talking about actively overriding the Shabbos. You're talking about taking the lead and melting it down to make it molten lead. That's a malacha d'oraisa. How could this Kal V'chomer be successful, be valid? We have a principle called Dayol Levamin Adin Lios Kenadu. And again, Tosfos goes through a whole pilpul based on a Gemara comment and try to prove that Rabbi Tarfon never accepted, well, I shouldn't say never accepted, but he severely limited the application of that principle called Dayol Levamin Adin in such a way that this Kal V'chomer would be valid. Now Tosfos suggests a whole nother approach to the Kal V'chomer. And by doing so, he's going to sideswipe this problem of Dayol. And what is that? That the Kal V'chomer is not based on Ritzicha being Docha Avodim, which again is only Shev Altas, but rather it's based on the fact that Avoda is Docha Shabbos. And if Avoda is Docha Shabbos, which means the carbon tummy twice daily, which is going to be brought even on a Saturday, then how much more so would Ritzicha, meaning put the murderer to death, would certainly override the Shabbos, because putting the murderer to death overrides Avoda. That puts it on a status of being more Chomer than Avoda. And if Avoda overrides Shabbos, in the case of a carbon tummy, how much more so would Ritzicha override the Shabbos? And then we only use the Chumrah of Ritzicha vis-a-vis Avoda in order to prove that on the hierarchy, on the scale, Ritzicha comes above Avoda. But the real essence and the thrust of the Kal V'chomer is from the fact that Avoda overrides Shabbos. If Avoda overrides Shabbos, then anything that's more powerful than Avoda would certainly override the Shabbos. And we know that Ritzicha is more powerful than Avoda because in a choice between Avoda and Ritzicha, we take him out to die. And therefore, if Avoda overrides Shabbos, then certainly Ritzicha overrides. And what is Tosa's gain now? This whole business about Shevi Altas is irrelevant because we're not, the Kavachomer is not from the fact that Ritzicha overrides Avod. It's from the fact that Avod overrides Shabbos. Okay. Now the Gemara says the following on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. Otu essay doches losase lav losase chomer mine because essay vidachilo. So Rashi says that a lav is more chomer than an essay. So we'll see this inside B'li Neder in a minute. And Rashi proves it from the fact that we get malchus for violating a lav. We don't get malchus for violating an essay. I'm looking here on page Nun Hey, but let's go back for a moment to the Gemara on Daf Zayin. And you'll see the Rashi, let me just find the Rashi for a second. Where is it? Otu Essay Didachi. In my Gemara, you'll see it on the right side. There's something called Gilyon Hashas. Do you have that in your Gemara? Which is Reb Kivega. There's like a little squiggle above Gilyon Hashas. So if you drop down just a little bit below that Gilyon Hashas, you'll see that Rashi says, Lo saseh chomer minei sharei lokin olav. See that? Sharei lokin olav? You might want to underline those words in Rashi. Actually, I should do it here in my Rashi too, but I don't know what I took out of pen, but of course. When you have to find it, here it is. Okay. So Rashi says, Sharei Lokin Olav. So let's go over the Gemara for a minute. So we'll see how to plug in this Rashi. V'hodar Omar. Now, V'hodar Omar appears actually a few times on the page, so let's not get confused. But Hodar Omar above Tosas Dibra Maskil Shenema on the left column, the second Tosas. Just go about 3-4 lines above that, and the first word on the line is the us. So it says Hodar Omar, and the Tan and the Brisa now goes back and he says, you know what? O Eno. You remember we spent a lot of time on this O Eno. And even Mises Bezdin could not override the shots. He Amar, when do we say Yamrin Osi Ese Dachalosa Selosa Grave Losa Sheet Hares Ishamet Dach. Okay, so that's number one. We don't know that an essay could be docha a losa sesheish bochar. That's the first oeno. Now we're getting to the second oeno, and that's again Hodar Omar. You see that Hodar Omar? It says Hodar Omar. Ki otu asay doches losase. He says the following. Maybe we should execute the condemned on Shabbos. That's the second O'ena, which is Elafilu b'Shabbos. You'll tell me that what? that maybe an essay does not have the power to override a losas yeshbo chores, or to ase doches losas lav losas chomer mine. More asks like a rhetorical question. Isn't it really the case that losas is more chomer than an essay? And nevertheless, the Ka'asi essay, V'dochi Losa says, Mali Chumra Zuta, Mali Chumra Rab. So Rashi says, what does Gemara mean that essay, that, let's go the other way around, that Losa says more chomer than an essay, because Losa says generates a chiyuv malchus, whereas the violation of an essay does not incur a chiyuv malchus. So Pirish Rashi is on the left column. Shalav chomer min essay. She came lokin al alav. He ain't lokin al essay because of oral chaner. Shaladivrei amar shah b'sanhedrin lechora ein hechrech shechumer hi zu. Okay, he's quoting a marsha in Sanhedrin, which he tells you you'll find on page Samach Dal. Why? Because of a marsha the bir tamasha ein on shemin adin, that we cannot derive an onish from a kal v'chomer shu mishum sheyesh lomar adaram kevan shechumer ein dailo b'onish shel kal mimenu spis varzu ein lo chiach mimasha lokim al lav below al essay shalav chomer min essay yitochin shadarav dafka mishum essay chomer min alav l'chein lo dailo b'malchus. Perhaps, as the Marsha says, the fact that you don't get Malchus is a way of indicating that you don't deserve Malchus. What does it mean to deserve Malchus? Malchus, as any onish, guarantees kapara. We're not going to give you the option of a kapara. You're going to be stuck without a machap. That's called no Malchus. That's the chumrah of no Malchus. So maybe an essay is more chomer than a losaseh. You'll ask me, but there's no Malchus in the case of a violation of essay. Adarab, that's because of its chumrah, not because of its kula. The Torah did not want the violation of an essay to get away easily, so to speak, with a kapara of Malchus. So then, what does it mean when the Gemara says that an essay is less chomer than a losas? A losas is chomer meaning. What does it mean? It can't be Malchus, according to that day in the Marsha. He says, Yesh levar b'ofen Shkolas ha'essay kineged halosasi. When we weigh and evaluate the essay on one side of the scale, losa the other. Shaveras essay hi b'shevi altas. That's how I always understood it, right? That you're not violating an isur, you're just non-fulfillment of an essay. However, in contrast, averis alav hi b'kum v'essay. You're actively, so to speak, violating the will of God. And a maisa is chamur than a bittul essay, which is only a bittul maisa. Excellent, brilliant. The kash is brilliant and the teretz is brilliant. Now, in the bottom paragraph, afshesu yosenu mevur she'alav chomer min ha'essay mikol makom ha'essay dochos. Now we have a paradox. The Gemara is explicit that an essay is not as chomer as a losas. A losas is more chomer. So why is that essay docha losas? So he invokes the Ramban on the Aseret Dibros, Dibra Maskal Zochres Yom HaShabbos L'Kacho. And the Ramban says, "Ve'emes hu gamkein imidas zochar ramzu b'mitzvos asay hu hayotze midas ha'ava hu lemidas rachamim ya'osa mitzvah mitzvos adonov ohuv lo v'adonov merachem olav umidas shomer b'mitzvos los aseh hu lemidas adin v'yotze midas hayira Yanishmar miyasos bara v'yeni adonov Yori Osa. So the Ramban makes a contrast between Ava and Yira. In the case of the Losa, say you're afraid of violating the will of God and incurring a punishment, therefore you're Yored, you're afraid. That's what motivates you in the case of a Losa. So in the case of an essay, you're motivated by Ava. Now, I'm not sure if he means Ava as a motivation for the person who fulfills the mitzvah. Say, maybe he means the Ava is the, so to speak, the underlying reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded you in the essay. He wants you to fulfill his will, and Ha'osa mitzvahs Adonov Ohuvlo. Ohuvlo, I think, means Ohuvlo Adonov. So Hashem wants to increase and strengthen that level of Ava that he has. So he gives us the opportunity to fulfill his will, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu feels the Ava. Again, it's difficult to ascribe to the emotional emotions. That's why I shied away from this shot. But that's what the Ramban seems to be indicating. I mean, we speak about, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase Nachas Ruach Leboro. Hazal speak about giving some sort of a pleasure to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Again, it shouldn't be understood in human terms. But, sometimes when we describe God and his will, we have to use human terms. God and his midos, talk about compassion and din. L'chein, says the Ramban, mitzvahs hasei gedola mi mitzvahs lo saseh, k'mo she'ava gedola mi yira. Ava is primary, is greater than yira. And the essay represents Ava, whereas the lo saseh yira. Amakayim the osa begufo v'mamono ritzon adonav gadol me'anishmar me'asos rav yed. So let's describe two scenarios of the servants of the master. In one case, the servant actively fulfills the will of the master, and in the second case, the servant avoids violating the will of the master. The first is greater than the second. So since the essay is greater than the losaseh, because Av is greater than the Yira, therefore the essay trumps the losaseh. When we play there, because if you violate the will of God and violate an Avera, that's more severe than non-fulfillment. Non-fulfillment is the absence of Ava, but now we're talking about a person who violates the will of God actively. That's a losas. The osim bodin you go malchus umisa v'ein osim din b'mitzvus asay klal ella b'mordin. Okay, so mordin means he proclaims that he's not interested in doing mitzvahs. Such a person, because of the nature of the extent of the severe merida, then we give him some sort of punishment. But as a general rule, there's no punishment for the non-fulfillment of an essay. So he didn't reach the level and be mekayim the av. But in the case of a losaseh, where he actively violated the will of God, then he deserves a punishment. So the onish for mitzvahs losaseh, paradoxically, is more severe than the non-fulfillment of an essay, even though an essay is greater than a losaseh, because an essay is ava and a losaseh is only yira, an essay docha losaseh. But as far as onshim are concerned, if you didn't reach the level of Ava that the Torah wanted you to aspire to, that's not the same as violating Yira and implementing an action that contravenes the will of God. Now, let's just see if this Ramban will put things into perspective. Gemara is saying that in and of itself, the losas is more chamer than the essay. And Rashi says because you get malchus. And the Aruch Laner says because non-fulfillment in the essay is b'shevi altas, it was the violation of a law is become baseh. But according to the Ramban, it's still a little bit stuck up there. Why does an essay? So an essay is greater than a losas because Abba is greater than Yira. Therefore, an essay is built for losas. Does that make sense? I'm just wondering if this Ramban is going to help us or hinder us. The Ramban is saying that Ava is greater than Yira. Hence, Esei Docha Losas, because Esei reflects Ava, Losas reflects Yira. And Ava is a greater madriga than Yira. I'm not sure I understand this Ramban. I mean, Ramban admits that the violation of a losas is much more severe than non-fulfillment of an essay. That's why you punish him in the case of a violation of a losas. Like a violation of a losas is antithetical to Yira. He's doing the opposite of Yira. In the case of non-fulfillment of an essay, he didn't reach that level of Av. But that's not at all as bad as violating the will of God, which is the opposite of Yira. The opposite of Yira is more chamor than the non-fulfillment of absence of an essay, of a the absence of Av. I mean, the absence of Av means you didn't reach that level, but when you trample on Yira, you're basically rebelling against the will of God. So I understand why how the Ramban justifies the punishments for a violation of a law as opposed to non-fulfillment. But in that light, I would have said that ain't essay docha losas. How can the essay override a losas when, for the sake of Abba, very nice, you want Abba, you want to express manifest Abba, but how's that going to allow you to do the opposite of Yira? See, I understand if you were in a choice situation between non-fulfillment of an essay and non-fulfillment of a losas, so let me say it differently. If you were in a choice, you have to make a choice between fulfilling an essay and avoiding a losas. Let's say the two streets, right? Here I can do an essay, and here I can avoid a losas. So I understand very well that Av is greater than Yira. And although you can be Mekayim Yira by avoiding a losas, but you can aspire for greater heights by fulfilling an essay, because that's Av. But when you're talking on the scale between fulfilling an essay of Ava and violating a losas, so that I would say the violation of the law is certainly more severe and weighs heavier on the scale than fulfilling an essay. Let's say you get 5 points of brownie points for a fulfillment of an essay. Non-fulfillment of a lav would be 2 brownie points. But violation of the law would be -10. All right, you get malchus for that. You don't get malchus for non-fulfillment of the 5 of av. So now when you have a confrontation between fulfilling an av of an essay and violating a losis is a lot more chomer in the negative side than the positive side of fulfilling the essay. Doing something that's antithetical to yira is a lot worse than non-fulfilling av. So why is essay dochalosis? You know what I mean? There's a piece missing in the logic of the Ramban. I think what the Ramban is saying is that he sort of, let's put ourselves kaviyachol into the divine perspective. The kisei hakol. You have 2 choices. You can have the fulfillment of an essay with a violation of the law, or you could have the non-fulfillment of the essay and the non-violation of the law. So I prefer that you fulfill the essay, even though it means violating the law. Now you'll ask me, what do you mean? But violating the law is more chomer. That's a -10. Fulfilling the essay is a 5. Yeah, but it doesn't work like that, because once the Torah is telling you that essay dochalosas, for the sake of ava, I'm going to allow you to override yira, then the Torah is saying that there is no yira here in this case. The Torah is saying that you're not violating the law. He said, but that makes sense to be old hutra. I don't know if you hold the chuya, which we've been holding all along. But even the chuya, if the Rebbeinu Shalom is giving you the green light to be dochalotas, because the Torah is eager to get your kiyum essay as an ava, as an expression of ava, then your violation of a losas is within the parameter of the Ratzon Hashem. Hashem is indicating his Ratzon is that you violate the losas. So the reason why a violation of losas is a -10, why it's so dramatic, is because you're going against the will of Hashem. But in the case of essay dochalosas, Hashem is saying you're not going against my will. So for sure you want to do the essay. The only problem is, if I go with that mahalach, I don't need all of this discussion about out in Europe. Just drop it all. Just simply say that essay dochalosis, and because in this case the Torah is giving you the license to be dochalosis, and therefore you're not violating the will of God. On the contrary, what you're doing is fulfilling the will of God by implementing the essay. I'm not exactly sure why you have to introduce the concepts of Ava and Yira. Now, remind me, you have Nun Vav, right? Or you don't have Nun Vav. All right, so I'll just want to cover the first paragraph in Nun Vav. Is there any nafkamina lamaisa, practically, that we would derive from this Gemara that a lav is more chomer than an essay? So this is a discussion of the Tosefes Yom Kippur. I don't know what he wants here in the footnote, but this is the same author as the Kapos Tmara, which is on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. But he also wrote another book on other Masechtas, which is called Tosefes Yom Kippur. And he quotes a Gemara in Yuma, a Gimel. Misha Chazo Bulmus. So you have a person who is literally fainting on Yom Kippur from the fast. And he gets something called bulmus, which attacks his eyesight. And it could be very, very dangerous because bulmus travels through the body. It starts with the eyes and then affects the whole body. He's machilin also. He's going to have to eat on Yom Kippur. And the Gemara says, kal. There are different isurim. Give him the less severe isur first, And if need be, if you can't satisfy and bring him back to good health, then give him a more severe. But first start with the cow. Now, I gave you the case of bulmus on Yom Kippur, but bulmus can apply the whole year round. Let's say a person gets bulmus. We have to feed him. There's nothing to feed him. We can feed him nevela, or we can feed him tevel. So we have a rule, kal tchila. We're going to feed him uh, nevela, because nevela is kal vis-a-vis tevel. Oh, I got it right. Tevel shvius, shvius. Now, let's go over this. Tevel utvila, I'm sorry, tevel unevela, machilin also nevela. Now you're telling me tevel ushvius. Shvius is less common than nevela. Because the Torah doesn't say you can't eat it on Shvius. The Torah says that the mitzvah is to, let's say, put it out there for the poor people, whatever it is. Lama hutzach lashmiinu betevel v'shvius yoklenu shvius. Harei kavachomer. In b'makom tevel machilin so nevela. So we try to avoid feeding him tevel at all costs, even if it means we have to feed him nevela. And kol shkein shenachilo so shvius, which is only an essay. What is the essay here? Let's see the footnote. I don't know. It just tells you look in Rashi. It's in Yom. So that's the Gemara in Yom. Why did the Gemara have to tell me Tevel Shvis? Now he asks a second kasha. This is a kasha on the Rambam in Perek Daled Milchus Macholos Asuros. The Rambam seems to imply that in Yesh Lefanenu Nevela Ushvis. This we didn't get to. Nevela Ushvis. So you and I would have guessed given the Shvis, right? The Rambam says Yitnu lo Nevela, lo Yitnu lo Shvis. Array, Chelo Hita Rambam Mokom Nevela Elas Fiche Shvis. Semi Derei Sof. Avalo Pero Shvis. Liachar Zman Biuram She'asurim Midorais. Why is that more severe than Nevela? I don't know. Lo Hutar Itzu Torah Shel Shvis El Legabi Tevel, but not Legabi Nevela. Oh, so now the Tosas Yom Kippur asks, Hare Nevela Hi Balav, Ushvias Hi Be'esen. Is Lama Adif Lachilo Nevela below Shvias? So we have two questions here. Both of them, I think, revolve around the same pivotal point. First of all, why do you have to tell me that in Tevel the Shvias, you're going to feed him Shvias? You can even feed him Nevela, so certainly Shvias. And paradoxically, the Rambam says that if you have Nevela and Shvias, you should feed him Nevela and not Shvias. Why would we prefer to feed him Nevela over Shvias? And Nevela is a low tasa, Shvias is an essay. See, what I would say, but I don't know if it's right, is that although Shvias is an essay, but maybe there are two parts and two dimensions to the Isser of Shvius. Number one, the Torah is telling you that it has kedusha shvius, you're not allowed to eat it. And number two, the Torah is telling you to let the poor people eat it. So you not only are you violating your own Isser by eating it, you're also tripping up the idea. Well, let's see what the Tosas Yom Kippurim says. Mikoach kushos elu, hasav liyaz, she'isur esei, yotzer chomer misolam. That's a kill. I mean, I didn't. This didn't even cross my mind because automatically I said an Isur esei is less chomer than an Isur la. You don't get any punishment for an Isur esei, unless he's going with the marsha. That's doing kapara. And he quotes the Ramban that we just learned before. He mavur sham Ramban she'esei gadol milosas. And the reason for that is because an essay is ava, and a losas is yira. L'chein essay docher losas. Achukshu al yisod zeh mikam makom. Minei mashem overall essay b'shav overall losas b'shav. Okay, I don't know. He's saying that a lav habamachal essay means that since the Ramban is established as an essay is greater than a lo saseh, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to encourage you to do the essay even at the expense of forfeiting the lo saseh, then a lav habamachal essay is greater than a lav gom. Why? Because the lav habamachal essay now has the power and the status of an essay. It's very strange because at the end of the day, he's avoiding a certain Isser. The Isser is derived from an essay. But I wouldn't call that Av. I mean, Ramban says that essay is on a higher level than Losa because an essay is Av. I don't know if avoiding a violation of a Lav Abba Mechlal essay has the same status as fulfilling of an essay. I don't know that that's Av. Now he quotes the Marik. Now the Marik is already, almost like a Kadmon. When we talk about Achronim, let's say the Tosas Yom Kippur is probably 250 years old. But you talking about Marik is 500 years, more than that. So he says that Esei Chomur min Allah. Mitam said Doche Esei Lola. So if an essay is greater than a lav, and that's why it's dochalav, maybe we could use that to explain why the Rambam advocates that he eat tevel rather than eat shvius, because shvius is an essay, and an essay is greater than a lav. Maybe, I don't know. Now, in our sugya, tam dechias essays alosas, enemy shum chumras ha'essay. El mishum shas horas haTorah belosas emikara lo nemer b'mokom mitzvah. Yeah, that's what we tried to say, that the Torah gave you a mitzvah and limited the losas, like kalayim b'tzitzis. V'heishiv lo hamarik amina Hinayim v'shachiv mar omro l'hai shmaite. You must have said this in your sleep. Why? Im mishum shalosh and esei dochalosa. So well, much. Im mishum chimtemin adin. Hoya esei min adin hoya she esei yucha af losa se shepo karis. He's saying that if an essay is greater than a losas, it should be even greater than a losas sheishbo karis. Okay, I don't know. Furthermore, he says, and apparently he's quoting somebody, she'isur shmisa b'yontiv sh'nitz tavenu olav v'losas essay eno nidches mipnei essay. Was ein essay dochelos essay. Mikol makom over al lav eno loke. Oh, this is the rifa. He after makom sheyesh essay im halav, on the yontiv side. Hoil ha essay, whatever essay he's obligated to, lidchos es halav. L'shem kof lidchos es essay. So we're left with an essay. Va'anu omrim, my ubi the high essay, my high essay. So the two essays neutralize each other. You're left with the losas. But one essay neutralized the losas. So therefore, there's no power in the losas. The imschoras hashoel shelo omri Torah klal she'esei docha losas lo nemar b'mokum sheish mitzvah. In came the isu yontiv came sheyesh ima essay harei mimelo lo shayach lomar shelo tzivsa al came had Torah. He's saying that if in a case of an essay and a los essay, you're going to go with this logic that in that case the Torah didn't impose the los essay, right? It didn't activate the los essay because Torah wants you to fulfill an essay. Then in this case of an essay dochel yontiv, so we should say what? That we said according to the Riva, there's one essay against another essay. Los essay already was dochel. V'meila halav b'mkomo omen. Lo shayach l'omashal tzivsa. Mela halav omen. The Riva says that the lav would be docha the essay. I'm sorry, would be docha the lav of yontiv. But now we're saying no. That since right, that the whole reason why we say essay don't losas is because there's no losas in this case. But here, there's no losas. Because the Torah commands you to do the essay, but here the Torah is not commanding you to do the essay. Because we have one essay against another essay. So how can we be docha the los? If I understand them correctly. in essay do. Okay. Again, let's go through it. The Riva is saying that if you have an essay against the losa and an essay, so the essay overrides the losas, and you're left with the essay. And based on that, the Marik is rejecting that. Well, I guess whoever asked him the Shaila wanted to say that the reason essay is docha losas is because the Torah commands you in the essay, and basically waiving the losas. What's the Marik's caption now? If you like the Riva, that the essay neutralizes the losas, but you're left with what? You're left with the other essay. Losas with the other essay. Then in that case, how can we apply the principle of essay docha losas? Because the Torah is not advocating that you fulfill this. In other words, the whole reason why essay is docha losas is because an essay is greater than a losas. That we saw in the Ramban, right? The essay is av, etc. But an essay overrides the losas. But here in this case, it cannot override the losa because of the essay that supports the losas. And yet the Riva says, nevertheless, that we will apply essay docha losa to neutralize the losas. So the way I understand it, he's asking how can you neutralize the losas, and the Torah is telling you in this case, don't be Mekayim the essay, because that essay comes in collision with another essay. But I don't know how to fit it into the words. He said, words make no sense. Lo shayach lomar shalot tzivsa al kach haTorah. I would have said lo shayach lomar shetzivsa al kach. Memela alav b'mkomo. So I don't know if it's my fault or there's a faulty transmission. Okay, so this is what I wanted to do here. And if you get a chance, Steve, maybe you'll photocopy some more for tomorrow. But now let's go back to Daf Ches, right? We started Daf Ches. Second, just remind me where we got to. Look for myself. Milo Modi Ula. Oh, I think we got to Milo Modi Ula, which is how many lines? About 10 lines down from the top of Daf Ches. Yeah? Okay. 8 lines down from the top. So again, we're going to talk about Hol Ishtre, and we're going to say that the first heter has to come before the second one. Correct? So you have the first Isur, which lends itself to a heter, and then you add another Isur. For example, he was a Mitzorah, and then he became a Malkeret. But in the case of Yibum, we have a problem. So let's just talk about the simple problem. There's a more complicated problem. The simple problem is in a case where Shimon marries Rachel before Reuven marries, we call the Rivka, I think. It would have been easy to do Leah and Rachel. So let's say that first Shimon marries Leah, and then Reuven marries Rachel. Reuven dies without children. So the Isser of Achos of Eishes Ach came later. So that was the Gemara's problem. So the Gemara says, I'll prove it to you. Milo Modi Ula, She'imra HaMetzorah Keri B'Leil Shmini, she'ein machnis yoda lebahonos. What does he mean now? The Mitzvah sees carry on the night of the 8th. And we're not going to be able to apply the principle of Hol V'Ishtri Ishtri. And we're not going to allow him to put his fingers into the Azor. Why? He says here, Shebalailok Shara Eskerio, when he saw Eskerio on the night of the 8th, Lo Yotza, what does Lo Yotza mean? Lo Yotza midi Isur Knisa Lazara, Machmas Sorosa. Right? On the night of the 8th, at that point, he's not allowed to enter into the Azor. Why? Because that's going to be delayed until the next morning on the 8th day when he's chayav in his kapara, in his korban asham. And the korban asham is going to allow him to put his hands, right, his fingers into the Azor. But now it's the night of the 8th. Is lo yatsa b'shashi ra'uya lahavi b'karban. He says, "Lefish al-laila enu zman avos karbanos, matan ba'onos, lo hutru lo achnosas ba'onos, ela b'shar ruyelika nimsa shenesar machmas kirio lifnei shehutru lo knisa li Ezra lazora machmas soros." Right? So we're assuming now that he became a carrier on the 8th day. How do we know that? Does it say that? The Sanya Mitzor Shechal Shmini Shalo B'Erev Pesach V'Ra Keri Bo Bayom. But if he had seen carry at night going into the 8th, then we would not be able to allow him to do the Matan Ba'omos until he finishes up with his state of Tumas Keri. And the reason for that is, why don't you apply the principle of Oil the Ishrei is because at that moment that he became a Malkeri, there was no heter. Because the heter only emerges with day when he brings his korban asham. And now he became a Balkari, and now Keri generates an Easter on the night going into the 8th, prohibiting him from entering into the Azor. And a heter to go into the Azor, B'Toras Tzoras, has not yet emerged. So once the Easter Keri is chal on the night of going into the 8th, before the heter of Tzoras, then we're not going to apply the principle of Vishra Yishra. So the heter in the brisa for the Mitzorah Keri to put his fingers in was only in a case where he saw Keri b'Yom HaShmini. And with the emergence of Yom HaShmini, let's call it daybreak, Igiyaz Man Havos Karbanos. And there's already a heter chal on the Easter of his entering into the Azor, meaning the fingers into the Azor. Now, if you can apply that to the case of the Easter Achos Isha, then there's no heter on that Easter until Yibum becomes a reality. But who adin li Easter Achos Isha she'eno nitar mishum haklal ha'omer meaning whole Ishtari Ishtar. Now the next line here I don't understand. Ela im kain uchal li achar shefar nitar isur eshes ach shebon. which is impossible, right? It's impossible to get to that state where there's already a heter on the Ishes Ach by the time she becomes Asura Olav, and Rachel becomes Achos Ishto of Shimon. So he has a note here which he summarizes the conclusion of the Gemara. Masika Gemara, what's the final bottom line? That would be clear. So when do we need a possible letter pater of yibum in achos ishto? That's heichel de nasa mes umes. Oh, beautiful. This is what I had in mind. So it means Reuven married Rachel, and then he died. The achach nosachat, and now Shimon marries Leah. Umei achar shalokal iser achos isha, elali achar shekvar hutar iser eches ach. So yinu matino soli yibum hol ishtre. So we need the drasha for a case where Reuven married his wife, and he died before Shimon married. I guess Shimon's alive, because that's where I got stuck over there, because I got confused with something called Achiv Shalohoy Bolama. It's Achiv Shalohoy Bolama. I mean, Shimon is alive and well, but he hasn't yet married Leah. Reuven has already married Rachel and died. So there's already a heter yibum vis-a-vis Levi, the surviving brother. I mean, Shimon, the surviving brother, based vis-a-vis the erva of Ashes Achim. Now, when Shimon marries Leah, he already has in his back pocket a heter on the erva of Ashes Achim, and now we can apply the principle of Hol V'Ishtei. For that scenario, I need a possible. Wow. And with this we'll try to wrap it up. Another possible justification where we need a letter to pater up the erva of, in the case of Yibum, is Asya Be'Kesha. We would come up with a heter for an erva with a hekesh from Eshesah. Me to Rabbi Yonah. Rabbi Yonah, the Item Rav Huna, Bereid Rabbi Yoshua, Omar Kra. At the end of the parasha, I write in Vayikra Yudches, Ki Chol Asher Yasa Mikol HaTorah V'Sei Lumen Nichrisa. So the Torah says Mikol HaTorah V'Sei, including all the arayos, in one fell swoop under the Yitzhakaris, under the ownership Karis. Hukshu kol arayis kulam li'eshes ma eshes sharia b'mokom yibum, of course. Af kol arayis nami sharia b'mokom yibum. It's therefore kosav rachman oleh. That's why we need the pasuk oleh. So let's just summarize. There are three possible approaches as to why I would think in yibum the mitzvah would override achos ishto. One is esei dochalosa, but then you get into the whole issue of would an esei be dochalosa sheshbo kares? And it seems that the maskana of the Gemara is no. There's no din of esei dochalosa sheshbo kares. The other two options are the following. Number one, in a case where not only did Reuven get married first, but he even died first before Shimon married the sister of the father. Then we apply the principle of whole history. And the third explanation is based on the hekesh of all arayas together. So we have Ashes Ach, which is put to Makom Yibum, and therefore it's a factor that would apply to all arayas, and they all should be mutter b'makom yibum. Okay, then so let's just make a note of where we stop. You tell me I lost my pencil again. I'm going to just, let's see, we're on Daf Chesam and Aleph. Omar Lei Rav Achami Difti Lirav Yono.
So the Zika connection isn't strong enough for him to not mirror the system.
The Zika connection,
When Ruvain died,
right?
so the Zika connection, the Yavam isn't strong enough to stop him.
One second. I mean, the answer is no, but why? It's like, how could Shimon marry Leah if there's already a Zika to is Zika what? And I mean, to Ashes rumor. That's a brilliant question. Let me just see if he says anything. The answer to the question is no, but I just don't know why. I would say the following, because since he could give a chalitza, maybe there are other brothers, it's not a full-fledged absolute Easter Erev. I don't know, I'll try to get an answer for you.